Hey, Dave Frary here. Welcome to part 2 of how to build an HOn30 module. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate some of my scenery techniques. We're going to build the landforms, we're going to add some foliage, we're going to rough out a structure or two, and if we have time, we're going to add a road or two to the little display here. But first, I want to dry brush the track so that it'll pop out of the scenery. I like to finish up the track work by dry brushing the ties. All this does, it pops them out of the surrounding scenery. It gives them kind of a dusty look, which I want for this project. And I'm going to dry brush them with acrylic white. This is folk art. This is a craft store product. I bought this at A.C. Moore. You can get it at Michael's and several other stores. I'm going to use a wide brush, a brush that'll fit over the rail so I can dry brush in one fell swoop. And I'm going to use this little piece of cardboard here. As you can see, I've used it before. I'm going to use that as a palette. So let me squeeze a little paint on it. And the secret of dry brushing is to put a little paint on the brush and then wipe most of it off. And one of the ways to tell how much paint's on the brush is to try putting a little on your hand. And you can see on camera here, just a little bit is coming off on my skin. That's what you're looking for when you're dry brushing. So we're going to start by dry brushing the track, and you notice I'm not bearing down hard. All I want to do is add a little bit of white to the tops of the ties and the edges of the ties. As you can see, you don't have to be too fussy with this. All I want to do is make sure I get pretty good coverage and dry brush all of the ties. We're going to start by casting a few rocks in plaster using rubber molds, and these will be applied to the little mountain area that we made on this display. I'm using molds made by Sterling Models. I'll add their website to the end of this presentation. Okay, we're going to start making the rock molds, and what I've done, I've taken some of these Sterling Models latex molds, and you'll notice they come in a great little container that holds them level when you pour them. I'm using the Sterling molds, and what I've done, I've taken just plain water and I've misted it into the molds to make them a little bit wet. I don't want them soaking wet. I just want enough water in them so that when I pour the plaster, the air bubbles won't be trapped in the mold. The water helps disperse the plaster and kind of forces the air bubbles out. I'm using regular hardware store plaster of Paris. I buy this in a big bag, and then I double bag it. I dump it out of the bag, and I double bag it in plastic bags, and I keep it in a barrel with a cover, which keeps it dry. The worst enemy of plaster is moisture, and sometimes you'll even buy plaster in a store, and it'll look like oatmeal in the package, and that's because it started to rehydrate by absorbing water from the atmosphere. To mix the plaster in, I'm using just a regular dentist's flexible container here with a spatula that fits in here so it gets into the corners. These type of equipment is available from Micromark and other catalog houses. Now, there's a lot that's been written about the correct proportions for mixing plaster with water. What I have to say about it is this. I got a party cup here, it's half full of water. We're going to dump it into this little container. I've got another party cup here that's full of plaster. And I'm going to start sprinkling the plaster in, get it so you can get a good shot of it here, until the water will not absorb any more plaster. Now this is not what you've been taught, or this is probably not the method you've seen, but this is the method that I use, and it allows you to get the correct amount of plaster in the water. And what you want to do, you want to wait until all of the plaster is absorbed into the water. It may take 5 minutes. it's okay. I can see this is going to take a little bit more plaster, so I'm going to just put in a little more and allow it to be absorbed. And if you get anxious at this point, you can come in here and give it a gentle stir. But it's important to allow the water to absorb the plaster rather than vice versa. And you can tell when you've got the right consistency, because it will have a texture, a firmness to it, that's thicker than heavy cream, and yet it's looser than mayonnaise. But by doing it this way, what happens is, as the water absorbs the plaster, it drives out the air bubbles. See the air bubbles coming to the surface here? They're not trapped in the plaster. Okay, this is pretty good. It's still a bit thin, but it's looking good. It sticks to the spatula pretty good. So I'm going to wait a minute, and then I'm going to pour it in the molds. It's getting there. Now I'm going to tell you my theory for making rock castings using rubber molds. I never fill the molds to the surface unless I want a huge, heavy casting. I like the castings to be small, almost the size of tiles, like tile you would have in your bathroom. And I only pour into the mold in a small area. About that much is enough in that mold. And I'll move it over here so you can see it a little better, and I'll continue filling these molds. You can see I've filled the mold less than halfway. So, and this can all be done on the workbench, you know. You don't have to do this on the railroad. I'm only doing it on the railroad because of the TV cameras here and the lights are here and all of that. But you see, with a mold like this, you can use a part of it here, a part of it here, some of it here, and you can get 3 or 4 different looking castings out of the same mold. Last but not least is the little one, and I'm going to fill this about half full. Right about there. That should be enough. As you can see, there's a little plaster left in the container. I'm going to let it dry in the container, and then I can just flex it and it'll pop out. All in all, I've used a cup half full of water and a cup and a half of plaster. It's always a good way to measure. Once you get the proportions down, if you're doing a lot of rock castings, you can move right along and go very quickly. So now I'm just going to let these set and cure. It'll take about 20 minutes for the plaster to set, and after it sets, we'll pop them out and have a look at them. And then I'll show you how to place them in the scenery, add sculpt the mold, and then we'll paint the whole thing. All right, now it's time to check our castings, and you can always tell when a casting is cured because it goes from a shiny surface to a dull surface. So let's first, you can see the casting, see how nice it is. Let's look at a few more. Here's this one. You can see this has a lot of different little parts to it. We've pulled all of the castings out of the molds, and you can see how nice they are. And you can see there's a lot of pieces here, but it doesn't make any difference because we're going to be able to use every single piece. There's absolutely no waste by making the casting small, almost like little tiles. You can place every one of them, and I'll show you how to do it in a minute. The last thing I want to show you is our plaster. I squeeze the container and it comes out clean. So the advantage of using a rubber bowl. What I've done, I've taken the rock castings and I've painted them with a wash of black and a lot of water. And the reason I did this, it's like a staining job, is so that you can see them when I put them into the scenery. Now, I talked a bit about using small pieces of rock castings, and the reason I favor these is because I can move them around. I can art direct how the rock is going to look. You know, I can move these around, I can set them in place, different places, and I can really evaluate how these rock pieces will look in the scenery. You know, you might like them better like this. And don't worry about the areas in between. We're going to fill that in with Sculptamold, and that's the beauty of Sculptamold, is that it allows us to fill in between the rock castings, and then when we paint it, you can't tell where the rock castings end and the Sculptamold begins. It all blends together. It looks like rocks and earth. Okay, we're going to start by mixing up some Sculptamold. Now, the beauty of Sculptamold, one of the advantages is you have 20 minutes at least from the time you mix it until it starts to just thicken up. And you can work it that whole time. So let's start by arranging some of our castings. And don't be afraid if a casting is too big, just to break it to size. You know, sometimes you may need to use pliers for this. I'm taking this one, I'm breaking the bottom off. I'm going to use it like this. Okay, we have this one. This one's pretty good. I'm going to leave that like that. I'm going to put it right there, maybe a little closer. And I'm going to take this one. The rock lines go left to right. So I'm going to fit this in there like that. And we've got this big piece that I'm going to put right in here. So that's it for this side of the rock face. And I'm going to show you how to mix the Sculptamold. Now, mixing it is pretty simple. Here's some Sculptamold. You put some Sculptamold in the container, and you add some water to it, and you mix it up. Okay, you don't have to be fussy with this. You just want to incorporate the water into it. And you want a mixture that's, I don't know how to describe it. It's like wet cottage cheese. If you can see it, it looks pretty good here. Let's see if we get a good shot of it right there. Okay. Now here's what you do. You take your rock castings and you wet them. So if we wet the castings, they'll act normally like they're supposed to. They won't be sucking the water out of the Sculptamold and causing it to set in properly. All right, so rock castings are wet, or pretty wet. We're going to start right at this end, and I'm going to lay some Sculptamold on. I'm going to lay it right over the foam. All right. And we're going to take our first rock casting and we're just going to push it into place. All right. I'm going to do this again here. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to add some Sculptamold. And we're going to take our next rock casting and we're going to push it right into place where it's going to go. Now, you notice that everything here is still pretty wet and it's all workable. So I'm going to keep going and you can follow along with me as I do this. This is not rocket science. There's no tricks to it. Let's see, I wanted it like that. All right. We've got a little bit of Sculptamold left here in the bowl. And I like to put in an area, work it a little bit, and then allow it to set. So here's our little area. We haven't got down here yet, but we will. Next step is to take some water on a china bristle brush, and I want the brush to be wet, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to smooth the sculptor mold around the castings. I'm kind of blocking my light, but all right, so we're just taking the bristles of the brush and I'm just pushing the sculptor mold around the casting so that the casting looks like it was there, the rock was there before the soil fell around it. Now, if you get any sculptor mold on the face of the casting, you don't have to worry about it too much because you just re-wet your brush, come back in here and just brush it off the surface of the casting. Now, if you want to have it look like the soil has slumped over the casting, all you have to do is take your brush and just pull a little of the sculptor mold forward to look like it's hanging over the casting a little bit. We can also brush this out smooth. We can put erosion marks in the sculptor mold just by adding some brush strokes here. Here's our erosion. And this will all paint up nice when it sets. Here's an example of some extreme erosion that was carved into wet sculptor mold using the technique I've just shown by taking the edge of a china bristle brush and just pushing it into the wet sculptor mold. Now I'm going to continue on and finish both rock faces, and I'll have some commentary while I do it, and I'll show you what I'm doing, and if I do anything different than what I've just done here, I'll explain it. So now we're continuing along to finish the rest of the scenery. I've mixed up a fresh batch of sculptor mold, and I'm going to start applying it just like we did in the previous bit of scenery we did. Now this whole process, putting on this sculptor mold on this little display, if it was done in real time and not for TV, could be accomplished in about 10 minutes. I'm placing the rock casting in place. Now I'm going to take all these little pieces that broke off and stick them into the wet sculptor mold. They will provide some extra texture, and they'll look really good when they're painted up. Now you don't have to worry about the sculptor mold sticking to the styrofoam. It'll stick like cement. If you're in doubt at all, you can mix a little bit of white glue in with the sculptor mold, just a little, maybe 3 or 4 tablespoons or a couple of really big squirts of white glue, and you'll have a sculptor mold product that'll be a lot stickier than what comes right out of the bag. But like I said, unless you are in doubt, you really don't need it. One of the things that I should talk about here as we start to work on the little mountain at the end of the display is that it's okay to take a rock casting and break it. And I broke these here to fit the contour of the mountain. Now I'm going to put them in pretty much the way I broke them. And sometimes I forget and don't put them in quite the right way, but if they look good in the end, it's really okay. You've not lost anything. In fact, you've probably gained, because you can use these castings in a multitude of different directions and positions, and no matter what you do with them, they still look good when they're painted. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish this all up. I'm also going to put sculptor mold on the side that's away from the camera, the back side of this display, and I'm going to turn it around as we work on it so you can see the other side. But really all I'm doing is just adding more sculptor mold, smoothing it out, making a little bit of erosion on the steep parts of the hill, and that's how we'll finish it. And the next step is to paint it and paint the rocks. While I have the sculptor mold and the water out, I'm going to finish around this stream bed, and all I'm doing here is taking some sculptor mold, troweling it in, and then using the brush to feather it out, feather the edges together, and remove any real rough spots. I want the edge of the river to look a little bit eroded, not much, just a little, and as this starts to set up, I can put more and more texture in it by dragging the brush over it. So it looks pretty messy now, but in the end it'll look pretty good. In this part of the video, I'm going to show you my theories on painting rocks and painting landforms. To start the scenery, I'm going to use two colors of paint. I'm going to use an earth-colored paint, and this is made by taking samples, color samples, bringing them outside, laying them on the ground, and seeing which one is the best match to the dirt in your area, or the dirt next to the railroad tracks on the railroad you're modeling. What you want is an earth color that works with the prototype you're modeling. The second color we're going to use is what I call scenery black. Actually, it's a really warm gray, and it's made by mixing 2 parts of the earth with 1 part of flat black. So I'm going to start with my raggedy old China bristle brush, and you might say to yourself, well, why are you going to paint everything with scenery black here? You've already colored the rocks and they look pretty good. Well, I like to dry brush on the colors of the rocks, and I need a place to start from, and it's always good to put a darker color on first and then dry brush up to a lighter color. So I'm using scenery black, which is a color that looks good in the shadows of the scenery and of the rocks, and you can dry brush over it after it dries and make the rocks any color you want. I'm going to continue on here to the other side of the little mountain here, and I like this scenery black because it has very nice properties. It's a nice color. It's similar to a commercial product made by Woodland Scenics, and it's similar to their color called asphalt. And I use asphalt a lot on structure building because it's a nice dark color that's flat, and it looks good on a tar roof, on a tar road, and places where you need a warm dark color. I'm going to finish up on the other side of this hill, and then the next step is to apply the earth color. And you can do all of this while the black is wet. It doesn't make any difference. In fact, you'll see me in places here take the brush and go right over the rocks that I already painted black. When you find an earth color that you like, take either a dirt sample or a paint chip sample, take it to the paint store, and have them match it. And what you want is a quart or 2 or 3 or a gallon, depending on how big your railroad is, of flat indoor water-based wall paint. Flat indoor latex wall paint. And they can mix it for you, and they'll mix it, and it usually is a good match. And if you get it home and you don't like the color, then you can add a little bit of acrylic paint like polyscale or craft store acrylics. You can add a little color to it to change it, tint it. You can add a little black. You could add a little of the scenery black to it to darken it up. Or you could add one of the earth colors like raw sienna or raw umber. So the earth color is important. It's going to be the base for all the scenery building, the color base for all the scenery building we do on this little railroad. And we're going to use some of it in the next step, which is to paint the rocks. Okay, now I've waited a couple of days for all of this to dry. It shouldn't be real wet. It should be fairly dry before we do the rocks. Now, the most important thing is the colors that we're going to paint the rocks. And the paints I'm using are just craft store acrylics. Nothing special. They don't have to be artist quality. They can be school grade, which is the same stuff your kids would use in kindergarten. So Folk Art is one. It's sold by A.C. Moore or Michaels, and everybody else makes them too. So just pick and choose. But the 4 colors you really need are these. You need a titanium white, you need black, you need raw umber, and raw sienna. Now, if you're modeling the desert Southwest, you may want to throw in a little red, maybe a terracotta, or anything just to get the red level up a little bit. We're also going to need a cheap brush. This is a China bristle brush. As you can see here, it's one that's been well used. But it doesn't make any difference. A cheap brush, any kind of a cheap brush will work. I like these 1-inch brushes. They're 49 cents and they're disposable. So let's start. We're going to start by mixing the colors directly on our palette here. We're going to mix up some white and some black, and we're going to make a gray. It's a fairly dark gray, and I'm going to start dark. We're going to add into that a little bit of raw umber and a little bit of raw sienna. And this will be our first color. And all we're going to do here is brush down on our rocks. Let's add a little more white to that, just to zip it up a little bit, and let's do the same thing again. Now, unfortunately, with this technique, you have to let the rocks dry a little bit in between. We'll put a little more brown into this rock. Now the raw sienna helps lighten the raw umber. The raw umber isn't quite black, but it's a pretty dark color. So I'm using just a little bit of the sienna in here just to brown it up a little bit. So maybe just a little touch of lightness here and there. But what I want to do here now is just take some white. I'm going to take a little white and a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm going to make a kind of a light brown color. And as you can see, I'm just going to brush this over the rocks. All I want to do is create kind of a look of a brownish laval rock. Now we're going to add a little more white, quite a bit of white. There's our little rock, just about done. In the next episode, I will finish detailing this rock, and we'll go on and build some other scenery, especially the little river.